Edgars, okay.
So we are the blue guys, and over there are the green guys. And so basically, these are the people who are interested in critical thinking, improving their thought processes, and how they work in business. And those people are the ones who need machines to do their work for them, right? But actually, we will touch upon machines doing our work for us as well. Let me just say, open up by saying thank you. It's really an honor to be here and to be invited. It's a very impressive show that you have here, because it really feels like a show and a celebration. And to be honest, I'm really stealing ideas to use for our next event at Accenture Latvia. For a little while now, for a couple of months, I've joined Accenture Latvia in the position of CMO. So I'm leading country marketing and communications for Accenture Latvia, the digital software and solutions developer and consulting company here in Latvia. We're not as big as you guys yet, but we have 1,500 people here in Latvia. And we are on track to be 2,000 in a couple of years. So we're growing very fast as well. So some collegial looking up to you guys. But why am I going to be speaking about the topic of critical thinking? For some 8 years now, well, for some 7 years, I've been engaged in popularizing critical thinking and science communication in Latvia. And one thing that right now I can honestly say I'm very, very proud is that with a very supportive team of volunteers, the Latvian Skeptical Society, we've popularized science and done critical thinking workshops all over Latvia. By my estimates, the several thousand people that I've worked with, it's around 1% of the Latvian economically active population that have gone through my lectures or workshops. So hopefully I can bring some of that to you too today. So our agenda today is to look at some of the mistakes, one more public mistake story of really a fail in critical thinking in business, and throughout this narrative, throughout this story, to look at what we can learn from this mistake and other mistakes that people make, and basically to do an interesting but a little comprehensive review of the most common errors in judgment, biases in our thinking, what are sometimes called heuristics, and errors in logical fallacies that take place in managerial circles in business settings. And together, hopefully together, we can try and find solutions to some of them. So let's see how we can make this a two-way street, because I'm gonna want to get some feedback from you as well and some ideas from you. But our story really starts at the drama point with the company Knight Capital Group. There was a very successful, very fast-growing technology company from 1995 until 2013. It was a $1 billion global financial services firm operating not just in US but all over the world and many stock exchanges. So it was a technology company essentially. It was the larger trader on New York's stock exchange and other stock exchanges all over the world. And it did approximately $20 billion in overall trading volume per day. Right, so it was a huge technology company. Actually, at the moment, in around 2012, which is when we begin our story, it had around 1,500 employees. But something happened in one day in 2012, right? As we can see from the charts, and I think this picture tells 1,000 words. But what happened? According to the CEO of the company at the time, Thomas Joyce, a large bug happened. No shit, Sherlock. According to Securities and Exchange Commission review, which was released a year later, so what happened was there were two software developers, who were supposed to manually copy a piece of code, improvements in trading algorithm, but they missed 1 out of 8 servers. It was one of these engineers missed one and didn't copy the code to one out of 8 servers. So human error, right? That's what we call it. We call it a human error. Those of us who worked in risk management call it operational risk. But the problem was that there was no review by a second technician who was supposed to review everything, right? So double human error. But it turns out that there was no procedure for this code deployment on the server's improvement in this case, right? So these guys were what we call at Accenture, Latvia, we call agile cowboys. They don't always test their code, but when they do it in production, so in real life settings. So that's kind of one thing that we want to avoid, probably all of us. So the question then is, what can we learn from this one situation? What would be your solution suggestions? Talking about this code deployment in Knight Capital Group. So let's try out this two-way street. Any takers? What should they have done instead of what they did? Sorry? Procedure, yeah, so procedure, document how it should be done. What else? Check in, double checking, yeah, exactly. So exactly, kind of that's my thinking. You're thinking just exactly what I'm thinking. So there could be some need for automation. Probably Ingmars over there from LMT is talking about automation and robots. But also what you're saying, need for documentation and planning, and this what we call in Latvia 4 principes, this 4I principle where somebody double checks your work. Exactly. What do these things have in common? The fact that people make mistakes. And what I'm saying here is what cognitive scientists and neuroscientists have been saying for approximately the last decade. It's this idea that, from hundreds of years ago, we remember René Descartes, who said, I think, therefore I am. Well, what cognitive scientists over the past couple of decades are saying is basically, I think, therefore I am wrong. As humans, all of us make mistakes, and we have to plan for these mistakes. So part of critical thinking is being open about our thinking and being open to the very fact that we will make some mistakes. In cognitive circles, cognitive science circles, and neuroscientists call this idea bounded rationality. Instead of rational and irrational ideas, all of us as humans have limited rationality, and our rationality and our critical thinking is limited. So we will look at some ways how it is limited in business settings, and hopefully come to some suggestions and improvements. So now, because the topic is critical thinking, let's try and define it. So now again, this is a question to you. What would you say are some ideas that define critical thinking? The good thing here is that there are almost no wrong answers, because there are so many correct answers when you look for definitions, that a lot of things are applicable. So some ideas, what is critical thinking? What are parts of critical thinking that are important? Analyzing, yeah, analysis. Correct, yeah. What else? So analysis of information, some other ideas? Different opinions, very good, yes. So why am I asking this is because it's been such a monumental challenge for me as a lecturer of critical thinking, is that there are I'm exaggerating, hundreds of definitions of critical thinking. So if you go online, and you can do it right now, you will find at least 5 definitions that are correct, but they are as definitions for complex processes, they are not effective because they are too long, they encompass many things. Critical thinking does consist definitely of information analysis, and you need different sorts of opinions. But what I've come to define as the shortest definition of critical thinking, that I think could be therefore the most effective, is critical thinking is a skill where you update your beliefs or change your mind in human terms as new evidence becomes available. And it also includes looking for this new evidence. Now, moving on, some of the main key parts of critical thinking are open-mindedness. You have to be able to accept new ideas and actually change your mind, right? Then it needs this evidence-based mindset. You need to be able to evaluate information, assess information, calculate, and to be able to tell what actually affects what. So focus on what causes what, to what extent, right? Statistical analysis is a part of this evidence-based mindset and data and information society that we are all about, both Elko and Accenture here in Latvia. And so yeah, this is a big part as well. So making decisions based on your thinking, right? Because otherwise, it's pure philosophy. When you think, what are some errors in judgment, but then don't make any decisions based on that, then it's just philosophy. But the good thing is, we're here in a business setting, and actually we are making sometimes, and a lot of times, unconscious decisions, but we are making decisions on a daily basis. So, on a daily basis, we are critical thinkers, but our rationality is limited or is bounded. But then to be able to improve, right, we need these retrospectives in agile methodology terms, right? Or looking back and being open to change our processes and improve what we're doing. So then the question is, because this is a business setting, what is critical thinking in organizations? So any ideas? How would you define critical thinking in organizations, or what are the most applicable processes in organizations that apply to critical thinking? Some of you work, how many of you work in administrative tasks? So with process management, a couple of people. So kind of, I would say that you are the change makers or improvement makers. That is just my experience-based judgment. That you guys, the work in process management, are the ones who enable critical thinking in organizations. But I mean, really, there are some people who are dedicated to this, but we all have to be very mindful of this, right? How we improve our documentation, how we improve our policies, and how we do our work, right? In coding, in software development, it's just called documentation, or the processes or the steps that we take when we do a process. But really, if you think about an organization as a human being, then critical thinking in organizations, in my opinion, is the processes that people follow, and the closest thing how we can measure those processes is our documentation. So let's really start looking at these examples of critical thinking failures in organizations and businesses, and our culprit today will be the aforementioned CEO of Knight Capital Group, rest in peace, Knight Capital Group, Thomas Joyce. He's not the real culprit, right? Because we just established that critical thinking in organizations is everybody is involved, but as you will also know, CEO is the one who has the ultimate responsibility, right? The buck stops at the CEO. And I'm sure I've heard that Sven's is, in this case, also a very good CEO, and that he really does assume this responsibility as a feature of a good CEO. And I'm not doubting that Thomas here was also a good CEO, but let's just use him as this culprit or metaphor for what went wrong. So, very typical thing that I've seen many times is, one example, 2010, not such a good year financially for Knight Capital Group. And what you see is the annual report. Despite our best efforts, the external circumstances in the economy, market conditions were unfavorable. It just wasn't a good year, right? But then 2011, they really pick up the slack, and they have record profits. Everything goes well. We've had these amazing results due to our excellent performance. We've done such a good job. We are amazing. So how many of you have seen something like this in your experience, your professional experience? Any takers? Show of hands. So at least one person has, yeah, a couple of people have seen this, yeah. So especially if you worked with annual reports with a lot of companies, then you will most likely see this on a regular basis. But if you are engaged in any kind of reporting, you will almost likely see this on a regular basis as well. So it's called self-serving bias, where we construct narratives or stories about what actually happened, and we make ourselves the good guys. And we don't really remember what we looked at, the attributes of critical thinking. We don't really have this evidence-based mindset all the time, right? In this case, we are self-serving and constructing a self-serving narrative in this case. Okay, so in this moment, I wanted. So let's what we're gonna do is I really want to make this a two-way street. So let's do 2 minutes of sharing with your neighbor if you've seen some examples of this, what could those examples be, and how we could work in an organization to avoid self-serving bias, to avoid constructing stories about our operational or financial results in a positive light to ourselves when it's not exactly true. So let's do 2 minutes. I'll take time and talk with your neighbors about whether you've seen this and what could be ways how we could avoid it in a micro setting. It doesn't have to be a board decision. So let me take some 2 minutes of your time. Go. You have 1 minute, 50 seconds. And the people who are watching at home or in their workplaces, the people who are live with us here, please do so as well. Take a piece of paper, turn to your neighbor, and think about what are the examples that you've seen of the self-serving bias, and what can be done to avoid it. Thirty seconds. Okay, and the time is up. So some suggestions on what can be done to avoid this self-serving bias. Ideas? Potential solutions? Yes? There was a very lively discussion going on, so I'm sure there are bound to be many, many good ideas. Yes? Hmm? That's very good. That's very good. So planning for this, planning for investigation and these retrospectives, but really the first step is accepting that shit will happen. And I think what you, if I heard correctly, then accepting that sometimes shit will happen for no discernible reason, right? That is very important to know that not always you will be able to explain and to construct this story that will make sense. That's a very good point because we are storytelling animals, people, humans, and we like constructing stories that make sense. And a lot of times the stories in our life, they don't really make sense. So what we do instead is we construct self-serving bias stories that make sense to us and then make sense to other people. So a very good point there. Okay, let's move on to the next one. Again, using the CEO as an example. So oftentimes, what a lot of you will probably know that CEO bonuses, especially in American companies, are pegged to or attached to company's stock price and its valuation in the market, as was in this case as well. And what often happens is CEOs, they try to inflate their year-end bonuses by delaying costs, some costs that the company takes. So maybe you have a big vendor, and you will delay some costs that come onto your company, or you will bill out to your bills of your company, right? So these are just some of the most often used ways of hacking the CEO remuneration structures. So in other words, in this case, there's a set KPI or key performance indicator, and what happens is smart people start gaming the KPIs or using the KPIs, hacking them to their benefit, to their advantage. And this is called Goodhart's law. And it says that when a measure becomes a target, then it ceases to be a good measure, because people start hacking it, people start taking advantage of dirty ways and not always the intended ways of how you can improve this measure. For example, in this case, company stock price valuation, pick it up in the short term, and then maybe it's not in the long-term interests of the company, but they are in the interests of individuals. So very important law from people's behavior to be aware of as well. So again, this is the second time out of 3 where we're going to take 2 minutes to discuss with your partners of whether you're seeing something like this, probably on a smaller scale, hopefully not a telco, but on a very personal scale in your previous experience, but mostly what can we do to avoid seeing Goodhart's law at your organizations. So give me a sec, and you have 2 minutes. Please discuss. And again, the people who are tuning in live, please also do so as well. Think about what you can do to avoid this idea that you're setting a target for yourself. You're really, with the best intentions, want to quantify and measure your performance, but then some people are hacking it. And I mean, if you're a smart person, then you are thinking of ways how it can really be boosted and improved, maybe without doing that as much work. Thirty seconds. Okay, so we've had some time to discuss some cases where we've seen this in organizations. So maybe what are some of the examples if you've seen something like this, and then what would be your suggestions? Very good. Breaking down the KPIs, and sometimes if not, qualitative KPIs, are qualitative KPIs kind of a solution, or breaking down them as well? Both breaking down, so 2 ideas. Breaking down KPIs, whether they're qualitative or numerical, right? So doing a more granular analysis of a large KPI, right? So in this case as well. And then, so doing a more complex formula maybe, which is more balanced, right? Yes. And qualitative KPIs as well, if necessary. So probably binary KPIs. What I've seen is you take a qualitative KPI like reaching a goal, for example, having an event, implementing a procedure or writing a procedure, and then it's a binary, kind of a binary KPI, whether it happened or didn't happen. Thank you, very good. Some other suggestions or experiences that you want to share? Yes? Sorry? Internal audit, exactly. Implement processes, what we talked about earlier. You have a process that is put in place that checks whether there is not some shady business going on with these types of KPIs. It's probably a little bit harder for CEO bonuses, but just generally that's what internal audit is there for, to make sure that even if there are some KPIs and some people do start gaming these KPIs, then we can adjust, do a retrospective, and see how we can improve it in the future. And that's exactly what is really happening in the real world, right? This is a reality. We cannot eliminate it. Almost never will we be able to eliminate Goodhart's law in large complex structures, large complex organizations. So what is really happening is the things that you are saying. We do a more granular approach to KPIs, we investigate, we look into, and we see how we can improve the system, penalize people who have gone outside the law or outside the norms of our organization, but that's really the only thing that we can do in the long term. So thank you very much. So the last example that we're going to do this workshop format analysis for, lots of data is gathered, very many variables, lots of data, lots of information that could change the outcome or the decision that we want to make. So there's an analyst or somebody who puts together all of this data for making decisions. I know a lot of you have done this. I know I've done a lot of times. And then in the end, the CEO or the board or the committee or the managers still makes a judgment call in the end, right? So you do spend these many hours maybe working on gathering data, reviewing the data, and then still it's a judgment call at the end of the day, right? And I think this is a better format for taking out our feelings about this, right? There's the manager who has some analysts gather bucket loads of data and then makes a judgment call based on gut feeling anyway. And this is a signal versus noise problem, that there's so much information that some of it is signal, some of it is really the correct intention or correct information, but then there's a lot of noise. Even though with the best intentions we've gathered a lot of information that seems relevant, with this evidence-based mindset, trying to look at causality, but we cannot really distinguish between signal and noise, and we have this analysis paralysis. So let's do another 2 minutes on what we can do in these situations. So this is the last 2 minutes that we're going to do in this workshop format, where you discuss with your partner on what can be done in these types of situations and where we see them the most. Go. Thirty seconds. Okay, so time is up on our last discussion. What do you think? So what are some most often examples there where you see this signal and noise problem, and what can we do to avoid it? Show of hands. So who sees this often in decision making, or has seen it? Some people, yeah, some people do. And what are some suggestions on what can be done? Probably we've gone through some ideas that are applicable here as well, right?
The numbers, the results are always about the past. So in a way, you need to check them, but you never make a decision only on them. So it's usually about the bigger picture.
You don't usually make a decision just on the numbers, but I think you're so what the point that you are making is to be aware of what you will make the decision on before it's made. So to think about what information you will be gathering and to kind of construct a model, and I think this is what people that are into financial modeling or people who studied finance or accounting and finance as their major know that you construct a model, quantitative model, based on which you will make these decisions. So also the way that I try to evaluate my couple of job prospects that I had at one point in time was to try and put together a list of 20 different, it was almost 20 different criteria, and then I weighted some of the criteria. So the team and the direct manager was very important criteria for me, the most important criteria. And then I aggregated all of them into a decision-making model in which, so I had quantitative figures for a couple of job positions that I was offered, right? And then now I'm in Accenture Latvia. So that's how it worked out. It worked out great. So be aware of what you are going to make your decisions on, and sometimes be aware also that you will find out some, gaps in your thinking even after the information is finalized. So maybe even then, when you have all of the information together, be ready for these judgment calls or some new insights or points of view. And then the next one, which I think doesn't have to necessarily be brainstormed about, is one example is this. So this shows the red line is number of people who have drowned in the United States by falling into a pool in this past decade. And this is the number, on the black line is number of films Nicolas Cage has appeared in. So very strong correlation. It's extremely strong correlation. It has 66% correlation at a p-value of 0.5. So basically, they are very strongly correlated. You almost never see this in business even. Next correlation is ages of Miss America winners. And it correlates very strongly with murders or deaths in America by steam, hot vapors, or hot objects. So like in 1999, age was 23.75 years, and then there were around 7 deaths, and then it has correlated very strongly throughout time. This is just a funny example of showing a post hoc ergo propter hoc fallacy, which kind of brings together everything also that we've talked about, where two things follow one another, sometimes offset by time, sometimes at the same years, and then we construct these narratives that they must be related, right? So these are very funny, but also kind of very insightful reflections if we have this retrospective and if we are critical thinkers of how we should think about our experiences in business as well. That oftentimes we create these stories, construct narratives that two things happen right after each other or at the same time, and that they must be correlated because that makes sense. But it doesn't always be that way. And now, kind of the last example of this critical thinking fail. Let's do an interactive thought experiment. Meet Jānis. Jānis is a 22-year-old guy from a small Latvian town of Talsi. And when he was 18, he came to Riga to study in Latvian University, Faculty of Social Sciences. Yanis did good in his study, so he's just graduated and he's in his second job, kind of his first full-time serious job. So Yanis he thinks of himself as an introvert, most of all, he likes structure in his life. He likes to know what he's going to do in the next day, week, month. He likes to know where the things are in his life, so he needs this clarity and organization. He's not a party animal, but he still has some 3 or 4 very close friends that are his best friends, but he doesn't have a large circle of friends. Now, based on all the information you have, would you say that Yanis, which is more likely, that Yanis is a salesman or a librarian? Let's do a show of hands. How many of you think Yanis is a salesman? So some people do, okay. And now who think that Yanis is more likely to be a librarian? So a little bit more people think that Yanis is a librarian, and almost half and half out of the hands. Now this is an example of the base rate fallacy, but it's really a trick question, right? So I fell for this when I saw it the first time, and it's very human to fall for it if you see this. So because I primed you with representative characteristics of a typical librarian, introvert, likes structure, likes organization, doesn't have a large, isn't a party animal, was taught at Faculty of Social Sciences, so you might think of Yanis as more likely to be a librarian. But then what we forget is thinking about, wait, how many librarians are there at all in Latvia? And there's probably at most male librarians, well, 10, maybe some tens, well, definitely less than 100. And how many salespeople there are in Latvia? Like tens, if not hundreds of thousands, that can be called salespeople, right? And because we're primed with these characteristics, we don't think about the base rates or base probabilities. So again, another example where you can really reflect on how often this happens in real life. So yeah, thank you. No, actually, I just wanted to get some mid inspiration and applause. I'm just kidding. I wouldn't leave you at a situation where everything is bad and then I just leave. We have some at least 5 more minutes, so let's try and kind of really focus on some suggestions how we can avoid these situations. So one suggestion I have is this idea of perpetual beta. You have beta versions in software development, right? A lot of us know about beta versions, but it doesn't just apply to software development. It applies to Riga. Riga is never finished, right? That's the saying that we have, but it should also apply to our decisions and beliefs. If we are critical thinkers, then we will always we'll try to incorporate all the information that we have, separate the signal from the noise, and incorporate the signal into our beliefs, into our ideas, so that we can make better decisions. Number 2, we need to be introspective. We need to think about what we're thinking, how we're making the decisions, but we also need to be very mindful of how we feel. One very interesting study that I especially loved when I worked with lawyers, how this example really impacted them. There's a very influential study from Israel that Israeli judges, and it has been replicated in America as well, judges get more bad or negative in their decisions in criminal cases before the lunch. As lunchtime nears, they get more and more hungry, and then they are much less lenient. They make worse decisions in criminal cases for the culprits than when they are right after lunch. So right after lunch, they come back, then they are much more lenient, and then also towards the end of the day, it again goes down. And this image talks about being hangry. That's the new word for being hungry and angry. But really, actually, so behavioral scientists talk about this, what should you do? Instead of hungry, expand it a little bit. And the question we should be asking ourselves is halt. Halt, am I hungry, angry, lonely, or tired? So in some of these cases where at the end of the professional business day, I am hungry, I am a little bit angry at some of the analysis that I need to put together. It's already 8 p.m. I'm the only one in the office and I'm really tired, at that point you should not be, making especially emotional decisions. I should not be writing to my boss at that point in time that I really hate this situation and it's not decent. I'm probably going to make a bad job out of it, right? And number 3, we talked about, we are here because we're in a business professional setting, we are in an organization. So what do we do in teamwork? So words of wisdom from my personal hero, founder of the world science skepticism movement, really a great guy who wrote a Pulitzer Prize winning book it's called Science as a Candle in the Dark. From its chapter, Bullshit Detection Kit, Carl Sagan's advice is to have a well-argued debate, hold it on facts, so on factual information, do it by knowledgeable parties, so come prepared to teamwork sessions, and to really what also ideas from the audience came to hold this debate by people of all opinions. So if you are all of the same mind and same thinking, if we already come to a thinking decided, and everybody is kind of very much in sync on what we should do, then there's probably not much use for this teamwork. And now this is the actual end or not. It's up to you how you will use this in your professional life. Thank you very much. It's really been an honor to be here and to work with you. Thank you for the insightful and good ideas. This is me. Let's connect and have a good day and celebration and best of luck. So thank you very much.
Okay, let's say thank you to Edgars Lapins. We have a couple more minutes left, and we can spend this time asking questions to Edgars. If someone has something to ask that Edgars didn't cover in his workshop, feel free to ask, and I will give you a microphone so everyone can hear your question. So does anyone can come up with a question that you're bothered with all this workshop? I want to hear the finish of this workshop so I can ask something.
Feel free to ask me questions now. You can ask me in a little bit. I'll stick around. This is such a good,
I have a question.
Nice
which is your favorite Nicolas Cage movie?
My favorite Nicolas Cage movie. That's a very good question. It's a split between Face Off and Con Air. Two very good movies. No, and actually, The Rock was also great. So yeah, I should really rewatch them.
Recommendations for the evening and movie watching.
Also, hockey tonight. So let's stick to hockey tonight.
Okay. I guess there are no questions?
One question over there.
Okay.
Thank
I'll
you.
Give you Mike.
What is the best book you have read lately?
Thank you. Thank you for the very appropriate question. The best book, actually, that I have read on matters of critical thinking in business is called Super Forecasting. It is by the Ivy League professor in a business school in the United States, who is the reason. Some of you will know this idea that when people do forecasting, he measured people who are professional experts who professionally forecast economics, finances, those sorts of things. And he came up with the idea that the professional forecaster is as accurate as a monkey throwing darts at the target. So kind of 50% of the time they were correct, 50% of the time they weren't. So he's this guy, but he took this many steps forward, actually. So Philip Tetlock is his name. The book is called Super Forecasting, and to really contrast it with the book Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, who won the Nobel Prize, that is a very good book as well. But that one, Thinking Fast and Slow, a lot of you probably know it. A lot of you probably have it in your bookshelves. Most people haven't read it, even though they have it, because it's a little bit boring. But then this book, Super Forecasting, it's much better in this very practical terms. It's a lot more interesting. It has amazing examples from very recent events. It was published at the end of 2016, and it had examples from 2015-16 in it. And it's very up-to-date, relevant, because we are making decisions every day, and the decisions that we make, they concern the future usually, not the past, right? So it's really about critical thinking in general, and that's it. No book at all, apart from fiction books, has such a recommendation from me. So I really recommend this book, Super Forecasting. Right now, it isn't available in Latvian, but you can buy it for pretty good price online.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you once again, and enjoy the event.
Okay, let's say thanks to our first speaker. And